All right, so I've always been into self-improvement, right? And I've read a million books on different forms of self-improvement and physical fitness and just general self-betterment, stuff like that. And about a year and a half ago, I was reading or listening to the audiobook of David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me. And the premise of the book is pushing through physical and mental barriers basically by just pushing through them. Doing really difficult things in order to make mental, spiritual, physical breakthroughs in your life, right? And accomplishing things so that you'll have things to look back on when you're trying to accomplish even harder things, right? Facing adversity in everyday life may seem like a huge thing, right? You might be like, "Oh man, this workload my boss gave me is really intense. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do it." Whatever, something like that, something kind of trivial when you're looking at the big picture. But it seems really huge unless you have done some very difficult things that you can look back and go, "This is nothing. I did that thing, right? I did that incredibly hard thing. This thing is nothing." So that's the basic premise of the book, right? Pushing through really difficult things, hardening the mind, callousing the mind, and becoming stronger to take on everyday life, right? And it sparked something in me where I really wanted to do difficult things, right? I'm like, man, I am soft as fuck. I need to do some difficult stuff, right? So I decided to start running, which David Goggins, if you don't know, is an ultra marathon runner, Navy SEAL, had the world pull-up record at like 4,000 and something in a 24-hour period. Just a crazy beast of a man, but he didn't just naturally have that ability. His whole thing was overcoming these incredible struggles that enabled him to be able to accomplish these things. So now you have that background. After reading the book, I decided, you know what? I'm going to start implementing a little bit of this, okay? I'm going to start doing something that sucks, something I don't want to do. And so I decided, hey, David Goggins runs, right? I'll run. And for me especially, running was the last thing I wanted to do. Running is something I haven't done since I was probably 17 when I was trying to lose weight. And back then I was running, a mile or two at a time, a few times a week. And that's partly how I lost the weight. I think the most I ever ran in my life was 5 miles, and it took me 1 hour. Okay. So pretty slow jogging pace. And I was like 17, 18 years old at the time. So, not having run for almost 20 years, I've always been into fitness. I've always been into lifting weights, building muscle and stuff like that, but I avoided cardiovascular stuff like the plague. So I knew if I wanted to do something difficult that I did not enjoy to make me stronger in mind, running was it. So I started running. The very next day I went out, I think it was in March, but it was a cold, early March. It was like not minus, but it was under 20 degrees outside, very cold, and I set out running. Bundled up, and I went out running. And within a quarter of a mile, my lungs were burning. I'm pretty sure, I swear to you, I tasted blood. And I'm like, maybe my lungs are bleeding. So that's basically it. I lasted about a quarter of a mile before I had to, turn back, walk some, head back home, get in the goddamn house because my toes were frozen. And that's where my running journey started. So I continued to run here and there. I set up a schedule where I'd run 3 days a week, and I got to the point where I could run 1 mile, and 1 mile was a big deal. When I hit the 1 mile mark, it was probably a couple weeks later, and I'm like, I ran a fucking mile. I haven't done that in forever. I haven't done that in, 17 years. So, really proud of myself, right? Then it became slowly, mind you, this does not happen overnight, okay? We're talking this started a year and a half ago. So I ran for a while. It was like a mile 3 times a week. So 3 miles total for the week, right? And then on the days in between, I would go to the gym and lift weights like normal. Then the running started going further and further. It became 2 miles. Then it became 3 miles. I remember the first time I ran 3.11 miles, which is a 5K, I was ecstatic. And it was super slow, but it was crazy hard. And I accomplished that, and I'm like, I ran a fucking 5K. I was so pumped, right? And eventually, then I ran 4 miles. Then I made it to 6 miles without stopping. I mean, it just became, this was over the course of several months, okay? And I got to a point where I wouldn't run anything less than a 5K, right? So I went from barely finally being able to finish a 5K to now that's the standard, right? Now that's the bar. Got to run a 5K every time I run. So I was doing that 3 times a week. But then I was like, man, if I really want to get better, I just started doing a lot of reading on running and how to improve endurance and stuff like that. And I learned that you really need to put in the miles. Put in a lot of miles. Accumulate them over time. And the best way to do that is to start running more often, right? So I started running 4 days a week, then 5 days a week. And then I got my schedule up to 6 days a week. And I'm running, 3+ miles a day, 6 days a week. Some days would be 5 miles, 6 miles, whatever. And I got to the point where I'm running like 20, 25 miles a week. This from 3 miles a week, 6 months earlier. And then sometime last winter, 2019, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to go for 10 miles. So I did it. I did it, man. 10 miles. It was crazy. And it wasn't even that hard. I was like, oh, shit. If I could do 10 miles, I can do a half marathon, which is 13.1 miles. So a couple weeks later, I set out to do a half marathon on my own. I'm like, I'm going to run this 13.1 miles. And I did it. It was tough. And my legs were killing me. My hamstrings were on fire. I had trouble walking the next day. It was ridiculous. I had never felt that feeling in my legs, that real like lactic acid burn of like just destroying your legs, right? My lower back was all fucked up. Okay, but I ran a half marathon. Now let me take you back in time a little bit. When I was a teenager, before I ever started running at all, even for the weight loss, when I was probably 13, 14 years old, my cousin Chris and we had this little like fantasy, really, that someday we were going to run the Boston Marathon. And I don't know why we came up with that. We're like, we're going to run the Boston Marathon together someday, right? And it was just kind of forgotten about, right? I mean, we always said it jokingly with each other. Here in 10 years or so, we're going to run that marathon, right? We never ran shit. I mean, he went into the Marine Corps and in the Army, and I'm sure he did his share of running. But we never ran a marathon together. And when I started taking up running last year, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about that, because early in my starting to run again, my cousin took his own life. And this was last June 23rd. And I remember he was on my mind so much, for those months after his passing, that, and every time I ran, that popped back into my head that we were going to run that marathon someday, right? And who'd have thought that I would even get into running, right? It wasn't planned. We had forgotten about the marathon. I mean, we had joked about it even recently, within the past couple of years, like, we still got to run that marathon, knowing that we would never run the marathon. It was an ongoing joke, but that kept creeping into my mind when I was running, man. I kept remembering, because Chris and I used to run back when I was losing the weight, when I was like 16, 17 years old. And, but never more than, a couple miles or whatever. And that just kept playing in my mind, like, man, we're supposed to run that marathon. We're supposed to run that marathon. I just kept thinking about it. I would think about him a lot while I was running. And so let's go back to present day in the story. I ran a half marathon on my own, and this wasn't an official race. This was just me out running, right? And I ran the 13.1 miles, and I'm like, holy shit, I did a half marathon. I did a half marathon. If I can do a half marathon, what's to stop me from actually running that marathon that Chris and I said we would run? Now, he can't be with me, obviously, but maybe I can do it kind of in remembrance of him. And so that became the goal. And this was just maybe 3 months ago, okay? So like March, April-ish, I started thinking about this. Like, I'm going to run this marathon, right? And the most I ran was, I think, 14 miles in a stretch. So a little over a half marathon. Before I decided for sure, you know what, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it on the anniversary of his passing. And I'm going to kind of dedicate it to him. And there were no official marathons, right? Coronavirus has everything shut down in terms of like athletics. There's no marathons. There's no anything. I mean, there's no football. There's no baseball. There's nothing. There's nothing going on. And so it was kind of like, man, I'm at a point where I'm finally at this stage where I believe that I can run a marathon, and there are no marathons to be run, right? So I'm like, fuck it. I ran the half marathon on my own. Why not just make my own marathon? I'll just map out a course and do it. And that's what I did. I said, on the anniversary of his passing, June 23rd, I'm going to run this marathon dedicated to Chris, right? It'll be my own marathon. I'll run it all by myself, but I'm going to run the distance. Obviously, I can't qualify for the Boston Marathon. That's a pretty prestigious race where you have to run basically twice as fast as I am currently able to run to even qualify to get into. So, if that ever does happen, it's going to be a while before I can physically, before I'm able to do that. But June 23rd, I set out, only having run ever before 14 miles, the longest run ever. And that was another thing I wanted to do too, because when I ran the 14 miles, I kept thinking like, oh, I'll just keep building this up. I'll do 16 miles, then I'll run 18 miles, and I'll run like 20 miles, and get up there close to that 26.2 mile mark, which is a full marathon, so that I'm ready to do it physically, right? But then I started thinking about that book, that Can't Hurt Me book. I started thinking like, I want some part of this to be extremely difficult. Like, I want, when I do it, for it to actually feel like I overcame something. And if I had just recently run 22 miles, and all I had to do this day was run 26, it didn't seem like as much of a challenge. So, going into this marathon that I ran by myself, I had only run 14 miles. So I basically had to run almost twice as far as I've ever run before to complete the marathon. But I did it. I completed the marathon dedicated to Chris. I even named the marathon the Chris DePriest Memorial Marathon. And I had this idea. I'm like, this could be a regular thing. I can make it like an annual run in remembrance of Chris. And so that's the plan. I completed it. It took me like 5.5 hours, which is pathetic pace. I'm not going to say that there wasn't little stretches where I walked, because I had to take along drinks and electrolytes and a little bit of tiny bit of food that I could carry with me on the run. And I would slow down and walk while eating the food. And it was like candy. It was like Airheads and like trail mix, stuff like that. And but so during the portions where I was eating, I was at a fast walking pace, but then I shortly after resumed running. I'm telling you, by the end of it, I'd say by mile 21 is where it started to getting like, Jesus, I don't know if I'm able to finish it. I don't know. Like, I knew I had to finish it, right? But the pain was the most I had ever felt from running in my life. I'm not saying it's the worst pain I've ever felt in my life, but from running, absolutely. My hips were like seizing up. They were just in immense pain. My lower back was so stiff, like it was incredible. And the lactic acid feeling that I had in my hamstrings and quads and calves was, you know, way more than I had ever felt before. It was really fucking intense. But that was the point. That pushing through that pain. If you're going to do something, and especially if you're going to do something dedicated to an idea or something, it should be difficult. You know, like what does it mean if you went out and took a leisurely stroll and said, "Oh, I dedicate this to, you know, my best friend or my mom or whatever." So it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, and I finally did it. I ran a marathon. It wasn't the Boston Marathon, but it was the Chris DePriest Memorial Marathon, and I hope to do it every year on June 23rd. And I hope that I can get other people to join me. You know, other people that were close to Chris, other people who, you know, maybe eventually it'll become something bigger where we can actually, you know, have people donate and stuff and actually run the race like a charity event to where we can raise money for like wounded warriors or PTSD or suicide prevention or something like that. Something that would really bring some, you know, some importance to Chris's name and the idea behind this run. But anyway, that is the story of how I made my first marathon. I'd love to hear any of your guys' stories about running races, about getting into running, or doing difficult things. That's what I like to hear from people. Like, what do you do that is, or have you done, that it was extremely difficult and you knew it would be, but you put yourself through to do it? You know, like I said, the whole trip along the way, preparing to do this, I gained more confidence as I went. You know, once I ran that 5K, then I'm like, I think I can run a 10K. You know, then I ran that, and I'm like, I can run the half marathon. Once I ran that half marathon, I knew a marathon was within my grasp. But I'd never imagined it before that I would actually be able to do it. Once I hit that half marathon, I knew I could do it. I knew I could do it. I knew it would suck really bad. I knew it would hurt really bad. But I knew it was possible for me. So now my goal is just to get faster. You know, next year, hopefully, I'll have a faster Chris DePriest Memorial Marathon. So anyway, that's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like videos like this where I talk about random stuff, subscribe to the channel. You know, if you like this one, please click the like button, share it if you feel so inclined. But this is what I do here. I'm trying to make a video every single day. The subject matter will probably change drastically. It could be anything from like reviewing a movie I just watched to a vlog of me and my kids playing. I don't know. Could be a story like this. I just recently posted one that was about Kratom, the supplement / drug. If you're interested in that, go check it out. But like I said, if you like stuff like this where I just post random things every day, subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.